Thanks for taking the time to chat, Samir. So the first question is, the topic is really around modern search and, you know, really it's why is modern search why is search right now kind of broken for marketers? Why is it difficult for marketers? And we talk about this in the context of better control of the overall experience. And, you know, let's start with the very basic, right? So you've been in this industry for a really long time. Can you describe how people typically think about just search experience as a capability? What are their expectations? Like, what do they think about it? We've heard a lot of things about it's just supposed to work. Can you provide a little baseline context about that first?
Yeah. So, there's two sets of kind of, if you look at the audience, right? And when you look at the kind of folks in the marketing team, regardless of their, I think let's start with people who are responsible for the experience, right? Of the property. In this case, it could be mobile, it could be web, but essentially experience that they are responsible for. Today you'll find when you talk to those people, there are kind of few different gradients around those people and how they think of search. There are folks who don't know anything about search. And for them, they have no understanding or visibility or even a kind of appreciation around the value of search and what it brings to the experience around, what it brings to the content experience, right? So that's one. I think the second is folks who know search know search, have probably dabbled around, kind of either has past experience with search and they have done some projects with search, but for them, I think they don't go near them. It's because they've either had a bad experience with it or those projects have not achieved kind of the ROIs that they were hoping to achieve. And because of that, they see it as a black box, and they fear about kind of going close to that is because they feel like they don't have the full appreciation and how to talk about it. They don't understand it. And they sometimes kind of treat it as black art or kind of magic that happens. And sometimes when they don't, and they feel like if they take some actions or they are in a full control of managing and doing certain things, that they could utilize that search functionality or a feature to really have a positive impact on the experience. So in that case, right, and the reason, and so that's the second kind of folks. And then there is the third aspect of folks who really understand the value of search, who have the knowledge of convincing people within the company that search is important, the value that search can bring to the table. And they have also, have either through past experiences or have figured out a way to convince everyone that the solutions they have today, regardless of the cost of those solutions, is important enough and valuable enough to be actually undertaken into their initiatives and actually do something about it, right? So and they're okay with the heavy lift. They're okay with the long ROIs. They're okay with kind of the inefficiencies, because for them, they see the value so much that they can justify, right, that expense, and they're totally fine. So to me, like if you look at the audience spectrum, those are three kind of ways, at least I think of, kind of how you can bucket, right? These three audiences, or these three types of people within an organization or marketing team, right? Now, like then the question becomes, why are these three behaving the way they're behaving, right? And I think for the first part, it's just lack of awareness, right? So there's nothing outside of, they don't know anything about it, right? For the last one, they know the value, but it's more about what do I have in front of me that is available today to solve this problem, right? And the path that they go after is, I understand there are a lot of search vendors. Depending upon my need, they're heavy, they require implementation, they come with a cost, they come with a price tag, and that's okay because I, have gained that experience in this ecosystem, and I've been in the marketing teams enough that I can justify the value proposition of spending $250, $300, $500,000 to a company, right? And also depends upon the size of the organization where ROI totally makes sense, right? And they can choose a vendor, or they decide that I'm going to assemble a team of search experts, right? And I'm going to bring all these search experts, and I'm going to assemble that team, and I'm going to get to that, right? So now that's more of a build versus buy decision, right? Whether I use a vendor or whether I do it myself, that's kind of the path they go after. Now, the third, and again, it's just the building of it and then the care and feeding of it, right? And they've accepted the fact that it's just expensive and I need to rely on this specific specialized expertise to manage and enhance it, and I'm okay with it, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're living with it, and they've made their peace with it, right? And then there's the middle part, is where I think what happens is they have a fear of search, right? Because it feels like they look at kind of the folks that are doing it well, but they feel like they don't have the expertise. They can go out and get the expertise, but that expertise costs so much that they can't justify the value proposition, right? Or they can go by the vendors, but the vendors are too heavyweight, right? So then they end up kind of either doing nothing, even though they know that they want to do something, mostly because of they're not going to get enough wind behind their sail to actually make it happen. Or they sometimes choose, some sort of rely on a substandard, or like maybe the substandard is the wrong word, rely on the team that they have, but, they don't really get the results that they're looking for. And that's primarily because it is a specialized skill that needs to happen. So that's, to me, is kind of like, I think when you talk about kind of the from a marketing perspective and the audiences, that's I think from a context perspective, that's the way to think about what happens today and why certain people within, or certain marketing teams in certain organizations behave or act or don't act on a search experience the way they do today.
That's really interesting, because what I'm hearing is that, it's almost like there is really three very completely different mindsets. There's not like a gradual sort of set of, people who look at search as, in other words, either you're in the ROI bucket or you're not. and you're really looking at it as a long-term investment, or you're just kind of scared of it and you're like, you know what, I don't really even know how to approach it. And from the, you mentioned it from the marketing standpoint. So then how does this impact developers? Like, because what we're hearing is, and what we know is that over time, developers have taken such a heavy, lift. They take on so much of the responsibility in the role when it comes to ownership of the search experience, right? And so can you talk about how the developers, how do they think about that role, and maybe how what you just described impacts the developer?
Yeah. So I think if you think about from a development perspective, right? I think there's an aspect of developer who's focused around implementation, right? And what they're saying is, hey, marketers want a search tool. I'm going to take a vendor and I'm going to implement a search tool, right? That's one. Then there is an aspect of the DIY, right? Whether it's at the high end, whether it's at the mid end, right? I mean, the lower end, they don't even know the problem is. So so the developers aren't even kind of worried about anything. But at the mid-end side of things, I mean, the developer pretty much has a choice of utilizing one of the existing systems that are available out there, or I mean, or like I think also developers are in kind of the two buckets, right? One is around a developer that's oriented to the marketing team that is trying to build the search experience, right? But he's primarily focused on the implementation aspect of the search experience, right? They don't have the tools, neither do they have the budget or the time, right, to kind of really do a full kind of justice to search, right? They don't have the tools, or they don't have freedom to go make sure that they can have the analytics around or user behavior around search. They they can implement a search capability, but there is an aspect around search quality which they may be out of their depth around how to make sure they can deliver that search quality, right? And then the third aspect of it is around continuous care, feeding, and innovation around that search capability that is expected out of search, right? Which again, consumers are spoiled by Google and Amazon. And because they're spoiled, they expect the same level of search from a digital experience for any of the company's website. So pretty much from a developer perspective, who's really a web developer, which means he's great at building good experiences in service to the marketing team, he knows how to integrate search. But and I'm making a generalization, but like 90%, 95% of the people don't know how to get the maximum value out of the search, right? So there's a difference between implementing a search functionality and making sure that the value can be realized out of a search functionality. And that's why when you go to a lot of sites, you see they will have search because some developer implemented search as a feature. But if you search for something, you're not going to be able to find it. I think I was on a website the other day, great company that has a great brand that talks all about candies. They have a search capability, but if you search for candy, nothing comes up. But if you search for candies, things come up. So that's the level of nuance, which is a poor search experience, right? If you search on Google and that's going to give you results. If you search on that website, nothing's going to come up. If you mistype candies, you're going to have a poor experience, right? So there's a lot more around experience aspect of search, which is related to quality, which kind of ends once the developer has implemented that basic search capability on the website, because they don't have the depth of taking it to that extreme, right? Again, some of them, like most of them don't have the depth, right? There is a certain piece which you call search expertise, right? And then you bring that search expertise and you have to put that into your search team, which again becomes a very costly proposition. And the large guys do that. But then there's a third aspect of it is the day-to-day kind of looking at the quality aspect of search, understanding if the quality is being delivered and what are we doing about it. That's an area I don't think developers want to be in that situation, right? Because the developers love to create value, love to build value, but I'm a developer. I don't want to do the same thing every day again and again, right? Like that's not what excites me, right? I'm a builder. I want to build something. I don't want to maintain that, and I want to have to keep on looking at the data and change the data day in, day out. So what ends up happening is most of the search projects gets implemented and they forgot about it, because marketing team who do care about the content and the quality and they don't have the tools to react to that, and they end up in implementations or projects that might have been implemented successfully, right? So developers did what they were asked for. Developers did a fantastic job, but there's no one to then care, feed, and have a kind of a, kind of a feedback loop and a cycle after that, because the tools aren't available in the market.
Then what ends up happening? What do, like, if somebody today, finds that candy example, and does it fall on the developer ultimately then to implement that little tiny change?
Yeah. So if I'm a marketer, I look, oh, you know what? If I'm in the marketing team, what ends up happening, and I've heard that a lot, right? Hey, my CEO sent me this note on Slack saying, hey, I tried to search for candy. I can't find candy on our website. And we sell candies, or we talk about candies. Our brand is candy. And you know what the developer says, as the marketer is like, okay, so it seems like there is a problem. They don't know how to articulate that, right? Is it what is that? It's like, hey, search function sucks. It doesn't work. But go to the developer. He's like, well, implemented what we asked for, right? So then the question is, they have to go back to the developer to say, what do we need to do? And then you kind of, oh, now we have to build something in reaction to kind of making sure that they can react to it, right? And they go back to the developer to ask them to change things, and then the developer makes the change and comes back, and that apparently that cycle keeps on going forever.
Right.
So again, it solves the problem, but it solves the problem in a very inefficient manner, and it solves the problem where developers probably not happy doing that every day, and the marketer is not happy not having control and having to depend on a full development team and changing the priorities every now and then of that development team. So so it's a bad experience internally in the organization, and inefficient one.
And inefficient. You mentioned earlier that we've been spoiled by Google and Amazon, the e-commerce experience search. I would imagine what you're describing, those little changes that you need to make, they probably are happening a lot more frequently now, because digital experience is so much of a important kind of part of the overall kind of customer journey for most organizations. And
Yeah, I mean, look, experience is, people have recognized, right? And this is just the reality, right? People have recognized that an experience on your website or any of your property is very important, right? And people have certain expectations around that experience. And when people have a bad experience on your website, that reflects on your brand, right? That reflects on your ability to create a perception in the buyer's or the person's mind, right? Whoever is trying to do something on your website. And they're not, if you're going to provide a bad experience, especially when I know your brand, I'm coming to look for something that's important to me, whether it's research, whether it's evaluation, whether it's purchasing, whether it's support. If I come and I ask for that information and I'm looking for information, my perception of your brand goes down, right? Like the value decreases in my mind. Sometimes I may, you may have a captive audience that they're going to be, willing to stick with you, but in a lot of cases they'll be like, I'm going to go to the alternative, which is better experience.
yeah, and you mentioned brand there, so it's not just about commerce. And you mentioned a bunch of examples where it's just like searching for information and research and things, and it's not just about commerce. And to your point, then the brand itself is affected just because I didn't have a good experience. It's not like I couldn't find a product and therefore I didn't buy it, and therefore you lost revenue opportunity. It's just brand damage, reputation, because I have a perception now that they don't have their act together as an organization.
Yeah, or they don't have the content I'm looking for, right? Or the information I'm looking for. Because think about it, right? I mean, today's consumers, right? Or customers or consumers in whatever fan or fashion, purchasing is, I think, what's very common, we all associate it to. But if you look at the B2B websites, right? A lot of times purchasing is complex, right? Brands, there is an aspect of marketing where it's not just about the last mile of the transaction, it's also about that entire journey, as you mentioned, right?
Mhm.
And that journey has so many different stages, right? If you map out the entire customer journey, right, and ask any customer experience person, purchase is just one part of that entire experience cycle. There is loyalty, there is referrals, there is evaluations, there is awareness, there is, research. There is so many steps that goes into creating a great experience that, you can't just think about the last mile of purchase, right?
Right.
That's thinking too short term, right? Or too tactical,
Too tactical. Yeah.
too tactical. And if you look at all those, if I come to your website, let's say you know, I am a particular architect who's looking for certain information versus I am a buyer, what information you present is going to be significantly different for different personas that are coming in and at a different stage and in a different buying cycle.
Right.
That has nothing to do with conversion or commerce, right? It has to do with providing the right information to the right person at the right time.
Absolutely. And then having the visibility to understand what they're looking for and what they're doing on the back
And
end.
are you know how complex it is for them to find what you're looking for,
Right.
right? What they're looking for, and it's important for marketers to have that information at their tips.
Mhm. Are the marketers today then, following up on that question, and maybe, kind of going back to the idea that developers are the ones that those changes fall on, right? So the responsibility for that, they don't want to do it. Is there already an operational process in place then right now where, for the most part, right, legacy search technology, legacy implementations, are the developers making those changes and therefore, you know, are the marketers even aware that they, could control the experience and that they, should be controlling the experience? Or is the
I
expectation in the
Yeah,
market still that the developer should be doing it?
I think that's a good question. I feel like in a general sense, I think today in the market, marketers in their mind have written off that it's something that they actually, there is things around where they can have more control and have ability to change that themselves. I
Mhm.
think they've kind of written off to say, I always have to go to a developer for this, right?
Mhm.
And it's a corollary to that is mail campaigns. Email campaigns used to be a purely developer oriented function,
Right.
right? Like if you look at companies like MailChimp, what they did was they really enabled a content person who is a non-technical, non-engineer person to be able to create amazing email campaigns and give them the ability to have control over sending these, analyzing these, making these changes, and optimizing the entire experience without
Absolutely.
talking to developer. Now, developer is involved in maybe creating the first template or maybe creating a few templates, right? To make sure that that initial template completely matches my brand identity, right? But once that identity and the foundation has been set, I don't need a developer to run campaigns. I don't need a developer to do A/B testing. I don't need a developer to do subject testing. I don't need a developer to analyze all that stuff. And to me, I think that's the part that I think marketers need to know that they can now do that with search,
Mhm.
and they don't.
Curious what you think about this then. Just, you said the marketers need to know how that they can do it. Um, what do the developers, just kind of finishing out with the developer before we move on to the marketer entirely, but what then do the developers think of the sort of, it's almost like they've been forced into doing this for a long time. How do you think they feel about kind of quote unquote giving up control, right? Because, you know, at the same time that it's something that might be kind of tedious for them, if there's a process in place, sometimes people are resistant to change. And therefore, how do they look at that problem from the developer angle, right? Again, perspective of I'm doing this, this is part of my job, this is maybe even job security. And how do we think about that?
I think in the marketing teams, I mean, there are two aspects of that. I'll answer that in two respects.
Okay.
I think if you look at the pure marketing team, I think the developers that are aligned into the marketing team, I think those don't sweat, and I don't see pattern where they're defensive about that aspect, right? Because they are focused on the end user experience as opposed to the operationalization of the search capabilities, right? But I think what you see, the defensibility where I've seen that come up, at least in my experience, is in sometimes the consulting organizations that serve the marketing team, whose incentives are aligned around statement of works as opposed to experience optimization.
Right.
I think, to me, I have never met a developer who sits inside the marketing team or within an existing company. If they're aligned to the marketing team and the experience, I've never seen them resistant on adopting like search operations. They're very happy to take the search operations away from them because they can go build more capabilities that the web team needs to go build more, like go build the whole interactions around, user interactions and user experiences and all that kind of stuff, not just like search, right?
Higher order tasks, higher
Yeah.
order work.
Higher order value, right? They're aligned to say, look, we're all aligned to make the company win, right? And how we're going to make them win is by delivering a better user experience. And they're honest about, look, we're not experts in search, and that's not what we should be doing. We are experts in web experience, not search experience.
Right. You abstracted out that piece of it so that they can focus on what they do best.
Correct.
Yeah. And so then let's move into sort of, that discussion about, it sounds like that's going to make even the developer's life easier. They're now architecting and building scale into applications. They're doing other higher value work. And
I think they feel like they are now given options, like, for folks who've utilized, and again, SearchStax, I'll talk about SearchStax, but folks who've implemented SearchStax, it requires developers, right, to implement it. But once they implement, they're super excited about giving both the analytics as the management tools back into the marketing team so that they've built once, which can be used. And, it's kind of like, I'm going to teach them to fish, and now I don't need to be there.
right. So everything you've said here so far points to something, in my view. We obviously have an out of the box site search product. And, maybe can you speak a little bit to this concept of all the things you mentioned seem like the requirement is I have these people, I have this process, I'm looking to try to sort of give back control a little bit to the right teams. And so how do we think about this in a pragmatic way to balance the difference between implementation, updating the search experience, the operational aspects of it? To me, it's kind of like an iPad, right? Where you just don't have to worry about a lot of the things like operating systems and device interfaces and all these other things, right? The interface it's there to help me work on the task that I care about the most, right?
I think web marketers will appreciate kind of an example. Like, if you look at the marketing team, why do marketing teams use content management system or digital experience management systems, right? Are they building their own digital experience platforms? I mean, the promise of a digital experience platform is I have the power to create content. I have the power as a marketing team to publish content. I have the power to make sure that content is available, in a medium, the right medium, to my visitor, and I have a power to analyze how that content has been consumed. And we're pretty much doing the same thing from a search perspective, right? It just happens to be search is there's depth in search.
Mhm.
And we're trying to pretty much, in some sense, give the same power to the marketer in that context. It's making sure that the search experience is what people expect, making sure you have the tools to analyze the behavior, making sure you have the tools to control content placements, to control search quality, right? And then making sure when you do see when you do see abnormalities or areas of opportunities from an experience perspective, you have the tools to directly impact them, right? Within a minute.
Right. So then what does that sounds extremely powerful. The question is like, what kind of doors then does that open up for that web team, the broader team, right? And now we're focusing on the marketer, but really sounds like what you're saying is the marketer is now driving a lot more of the things that they need to be driving, the decisions that they want to
Yes.
make, have more agility. How does that, what doors does that open up for the team? They currently have a kind of a clunky process. So, what does it enable them to do? I'm assuming at a minimum, they can make more frequent updates, right? But
Yeah.
what other things? Yeah.
I think they can make more frequent updates. They can be very smart about targeting the right content to the right user. They can do personalization in a much more kind of like in a much more kind of contextual way, right? And not just in a typical experience level, but also at the search level, right?
Mm.
They could also, so those are some things that the marketers now have the control directly to do through the product. Like they didn't have those, right? I mean, if someone searched for something and the quality is poor, at the end of the day, it really boils down to the quality aspects of it, right?
Right.
And if you care about quality, then you have to make sure you have the tools to address it.
Yeah, and then can you maybe close with just like maybe we can close the loop, because you mentioned earlier, some people are just kind of unaware, right? And they look at search as a black box. And so for them, even maybe search is just like content findability. But what I'm hearing from you is that you can get smarter about how that engagement happens. And so,
Yep.
you know, I'm assuming that you're talking about the analytics side of things, where now I have better visibility, right?
You
So
have better visibility. You have better visibility on where people are stumbling. I mean, it's better visibility and you have better intent,
intent.
right? You also, what you don't know is search is probably the only place on your website where someone is utilizing their own vocabulary to tell you what they're looking for, as opposed to a vocabulary that you're using to communicate to them. So it's also a very important mechanism for you to look at how the landscape is changing in your users, how that intent is changing over the period of time, so that you can react better, not only to the experience side of things, but also to the content side of things.
So maybe let me ask one last question then. Why is this all even an issue? You're describing things that I'm assuming, can I do these with the tools that exist today? Or is it just kind of the legacy issue? Are they too clunky? And again, maybe what would help, people to understand this a little bit better is just that it sounds like there's really kind of a more fundamental issue. You refer to the black box. I'm going to go back to that one more time, because I think it's really powerful to hear you say that. The black box is the assumption when I hear black box is, I don't know how it works. It's magic, and I can't touch it, and it just, things happen, right? So, why is it so important at this point in the industry for us to be able to give marketers that level of control? Why can't they do that today?
I think why they can't do that today is because the technology is not accessible, it's not affordable, right? And I mean, it's not that some people are not doing that. Those people have decided that they're willing to spend that kind of money that is required to do that. So the rest of the folks are abandoning it, right? Because they feel like either, well, the tools are just not available that allows them to do those things and have control over it, right? And when they say the tools are not available, it's more about, is the tool available at the cost where it would make sense for my company, right? Is the tool available, um, that is easy enough so that I don't have to dedicate 2 people to maintain it? Because that's important, right? You know,
Yeah.
if like I remember, and I'm not naming names here, I know a vendor that every time you buy their search platform, you have to dedicate 2 people to make sure that someone on your team are rare to run those things, right? I mean, we're all familiar with, and maybe some of our, at least on the technology side, are familiar with Oracle, right?
Mhm.
If you're gonna install Oracle, you better have a couple of people on the consulting side completely dedicated to Oracle.
Right.
I think the landscape's changing. So what SearchStax is trying to do is saying that's the old way of thinking about it. There's a better way, and that's what we're after.
Can you give us one example, like a really, powerful example that stands out in your mind of an organization that had kind of abandoned things, right? And was in that realm of, what, we don't even think we can do this. And then all of a sudden they realized, okay, there's actually a lot of doors open here for us that we just weren't aware of because we didn't know the technology has evolved to be able to do this.
Yeah, lots of examples come to mind in our customer base, right? You look at APQC, right? They're a research shop. All they do is produce a lot of content around knowledge management, around processes and stuff like that. And people come to their site, and a lot of times they search for those things. And like they are in that bucket where they knew search is important, right? But it's, of course, right, not important that you can justify the entire farm on it,
Right.
right? But at the same time, they had I think these guys were running on Drupal. They had a Drupal developer who implemented the Drupal search on their website. And the marketing team is like, we constantly keep on getting feedback from our customers that our search is not good enough. But no one, like the developers, like, I implemented search. It works, right? And but then the marketer is like, well, I don't have analytics. And he's like, well, that's what I can do from a content management perspective, right? So they kept on going to their development team to see how they could prioritize all this work. And there are other things then, or that, the team doesn't have the depth. So they looked at SearchStax and they were like, oh my God, like we can actually affordably adopt that solution, and we can enable our marketing team. I mean, the developer was very happy in implementing it, right? The manager of the development team was stoked that he doesn't have his developer now worrying about every time they want to make a synonym change, they need to come to my developer, right? And the marketing team is like, I have the information at my fingertips. I have control so that when I need to make a change, I can make it myself. And it's a true partnership, right, with the development team. And I have a tool that provides a better experience to my customers. They did not have faceting. They did not have all the, features that people expect out of it. And now they've solved the visibility problem. They've solved the marketing kind of turnaround time problem, right? And then they've also solved a end user experience problem, right? And these are the 3 reasons that SearchStax is kind of the value that SearchStax brings to the table at a much higher return on investment, right? Like justifying a very, very high ROI.
Even if you're not a commerce site.
No, this is content. There's nothing to do with commerce here. There's no call to actions around conversions there. It's all about getting people to consume the content that they are looking for.
And like you said, that brand quality.
Absolutely.
Quality. Yeah. Well, Samir, this was super helpful. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much.
Cool.
We'll talk to you
Thanks.
soon.